I'm Maya, 24, and 3 days ago my entire family chose my manipulative sister over me after she screamed that I'd ruined everyone's lives by refusing to give her money for her wedding. What they didn't know was that I'd been secretly supporting their household expenses for 2 years while my sister spent her salary on designer clothes and luxury vacations. When my parents backed her tantrum and told me I was selfish and jealous, I walked out with evidence that would destroy everything they believed about their perfect daughter. This morning I woke up to 14 missed calls and text messages begging me to come home, because the truth about who's been paying their bills just came to light. Can you guess what finally made them realize they'd chosen the wrong daughter? Hit that like button if you think family loyalty should go both ways, subscribe for more sibling rivalry drama, and let's dive into how sometimes walking away is the only way to make people see your true worth. Growing up in the Martinez household meant living in the shadow of my younger sister Isabella, who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. From the moment she was born, 3 years after me, Isabella possessed an almost supernatural ability to charm everyone around her while simultaneously manipulating situations to her advantage. My parents, Maria and Carlos, had immigrated from Mexico with big dreams and even bigger work ethics. They'd built a successful landscaping business from nothing, working 16-hour days and sacrificing their own comfort to provide opportunities for their daughters. But somewhere along the way, their gratitude for their success became twisted into the belief that Isabella was their reward for years of struggle. Isabella was undeniably beautiful, the kind of effortless attractiveness that made people stop and stare. She had inherited our mother's delicate features and our father's confident charisma, creating a combination that drew attention wherever she went. More importantly, she learned early how to weaponize her charm to get exactly what she wanted from everyone around her. Isabella has such a bright future ahead of her, our mother would say, usually while I was doing homework at the kitchen table and Isabella was out with friends. She's going to marry well, have a beautiful life. People are drawn to her in ways that will open doors. The implication was always clear. I was the responsible one, the worker bee, the daughter who would support the family business and handle practical matters. Isabella was the prize, the daughter who would elevate the family's status through her connections and natural gifts. This dynamic shaped every aspect of our childhood. When Isabella wanted dance lessons, art classes, or expensive clothes for school events, the money was always found. When I expressed interest in academic competitions, science camps, or college preparation courses, the response was usually about being practical and focusing on skills that would help the family business. Maya, you're so smart with numbers, my father would say when I brought home perfect report cards. You'll be invaluable helping manage our accounts and expand the business. Isabella has different talents, she's going to need different opportunities. The different opportunities included private tutoring when Isabella struggled in school, expensive SAT prep courses when her scores were low, and ultimately a full ride to a prestigious university, paid for by our parents, when her academic performance wasn't enough to earn scholarships. Meanwhile, I worked part-time throughout high school, saved every dollar, and earned academic scholarships to cover my own college expenses. My parents were proud of my achievements, but their pride always came with expectations. I was succeeding because that's what was expected of me. Isabella was succeeding because she was special. College only amplified these differences. Isabella studied communications at an expensive private school, changing her major 3 times and taking 6 years to graduate. Her social media was filled with sorority events, spring break trips, and designer outfits that clearly cost more than any college student should have been able to afford. I, meanwhile, double majored in accounting and business administration, graduating summa cum laude in 4 years while working 20 hours per week to minimize my student loans. I landed a job at a prestigious accounting firm immediately after graduation, starting with a salary that exceeded what most people my age could expect. But even as my career took off and Isabella struggled to find direction after college, the family dynamic remained unchanged. Every family dinner included updates about Isabella's latest boyfriend, her job interviews, her apartment hunting, her social activities. My professional achievements, salary increases, and growing financial stability were acknowledged with brief congratulations before conversations inevitably returned to Isabella's more interesting life. The really telling moment came during Isabella's graduation party, which my parents threw at an expensive restaurant with over 50 guests. I had just received a major promotion at work, but when I tried to share the news, my mother shushed me because Isabella was giving a speech about her future plans. "This is Isabella's day," she whispered to me. "We can celebrate your work things later." We never did celebrate my work things later. By then, I was starting to understand that my role in the family was to be successful quietly, to achieve without taking attention away from Isabella's more dramatic life events. I was the supporting actress in a movie that starred my sister, with parents who were so invested in her success that they couldn't see how much I was contributing to their own stability. What they didn't realize was that their responsible daughter had been quietly analyzing their financial situation for years, and what I'd discovered was deeply troubling. The successful business they'd built was struggling with cash flow problems, their personal expenses had grown beyond their means, and they were increasingly dependent on credit to maintain their lifestyle. Isabella's expensive education, her post-graduation apartment rental assistance, and the constant financial support they provided for her career development was slowly draining their resources. They were sacrificing their own financial security to maintain the illusion that their golden child could have whatever she wanted. And I was about to discover that their solution to this problem involved expectations about my financial contributions that they'd never bothered to discuss with me directly. What my parents didn't know was that I'd been aware of their financial struggles for over 2 years, and I'd been quietly solving their problems without seeking credit or recognition. It started small, noticing that grocery bills were being charged to credit cards instead of paid with cash, observing that car payments were occasionally late, watching my father stress over invoices that clients were slow to pay. My accounting background made it impossible to ignore the signs of financial strain. During family dinners, I'd overhear phone conversations about insurance payments, mortgage refinancing, and business loan extensions. My parents tried to hide their money worries, but their stress was becoming increasingly obvious to anyone who knew what to look for. The breaking point came when I visited for Sunday dinner and found my mother crying over a pile of bills spread across the kitchen table. She tried to hide them when I walked in, but I'd already seen enough to understand the scope of their problems. Credit card statements showing balances over $40,000, past due notices from utility companies, and bank statements revealing checking accounts that were frequently overdrawn. "Mom," I said gently, sitting beside her, "what's going on? Maybe I can help." Through tears, she explained that the landscaping business had lost several major commercial contracts, reducing their monthly income by nearly 30%. Meanwhile, their personal expenses had remained the same, creating a gap they'd been covering with credit cards and emergency loans. Isabella's post-graduation support, including her apartment deposit, monthly rent assistance, and her upcoming graduate school application fees, had pushed them beyond their breaking point. "We don't want to burden you girls with our problems," she said. "You have your own life to build, and Isabella is just getting started. We'll figure something out." But I could see from the bills that they were running out of options. Their credit cards were nearly maxed out, they'd already borrowed against their home equity, and the business was barely generating enough profit to cover its own expenses. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I would secretly help stabilize their finances while they figured out long-term solutions. I opened a separate checking account specifically for family assistance and began systematically paying their most critical bills. I started with utilities, ensuring that electricity, gas, and water payments were always current. Then I moved to insurance premiums, making sure their health coverage and business policies remained active. Gradually, I began covering grocery expenses, car payments, and even some of the credit card minimum payments that were threatening their credit scores. The system I developed was sophisticated and completely invisible to them. I would monitor their account balances through casual conversations, then make strategic payments that appeared to come from their own resources. Sometimes I'd pay bills directly, telling companies I was calling on behalf of the account holders. Other times I'd make anonymous electronic transfers that looked like business payments or late client invoices. Over 18 months, I contributed nearly $65,000 to my parents' household expenses. The utility payments, insurance premiums, emergency car repairs, medical bills, and grocery expenses I covered represented the difference between financial stability and complete collapse for their family. Most significantly, I'd been covering a substantial portion of Isabella's monthly expenses without anyone, including Isabella, knowing about it. Her rent, car insurance, cell phone bill, and even some of her credit card payments were being subsidized through my anonymous support system. The cruel irony was that as my secret financial contributions stabilized their situation, my parents' stress decreased and their focus shifted back to supporting Isabella's increasingly expensive lifestyle. She'd decided to pursue graduate school in fashion merchandising, a program that cost $80,000 per year and offered questionable career prospects. When Isabella announced her graduate school plans at a family dinner, our parents were enthusiastically supportive despite their recent financial crisis. "We'll find a way to make it work," my father announced proudly. "Isabella's dreams are worth the investment." I sat quietly, calculating that the investment in Isabella's dreams was only possible because I'd been secretly covering the basic expenses that kept their household functioning. Without my contributions, they wouldn't have had the financial flexibility to even consider funding her graduate program. But the most painful part wasn't the money, it was the complete lack of recognition for what I'd been contributing to their family's stability. Every dinner conversation focused on Isabella's achievements, her goals, her needs. My career success was acknowledged briefly before discussions returned to how the family could support Isabella's next venture. I began to feel like a ghost in my own family, present, contributing significantly to their well-being, but somehow invisible when it came to emotional investment or recognition. They appreciated my reliability and my success, but they loved Isabella's potential and her dreams. The situation became unsustainable when Isabella announced her engagement to David, a struggling artist whose primary income came from part-time work at a coffee shop. Their engagement party was elaborate, funded through a combination of my parents' credit cards, and what I now realized was money they could only afford to spend because I was covering their essential expenses. "We want to give Isabella the wedding of her dreams," my mother explained when I questioned the wisdom of such expensive celebrations during their financial recovery. "She only gets married once, and David's family doesn't have money to contribute. We want to do this right." That's when I began to understand that my secret financial support wasn't helping my parents learn fiscal responsibility, it was enabling them to continue making unsustainable financial decisions while feeling like their problems had magically resolved themselves. The wedding planning began immediately, with budgets that assumed unlimited parental financial support. Isabella wanted a destination wedding, designer dress, elaborate reception, and honeymoon that would cost more than many people's annual salaries. My parents, buoyed by their recent financial stability, agreed to fund nearly everything. They had no idea that their ability to promise Isabella such extravagant support was entirely dependent on their older daughter's continued anonymous contributions to their basic living expenses. I was about to discover just how much they valued my sister's happiness over my financial sacrifice when Isabella's wedding demands finally forced a family confrontation that would change all our relationships forever. Isabella's wedding planning revealed the true depth of her entitlement and our parents' willingness to sacrifice anything to maintain her happiness. What started as discussions about a modest but beautiful ceremony quickly escalated into demands for a $150,000 destination wedding that would require our parents to mortgage their financial future. The venue Isabella selected was a resort in Costa Rica that required a minimum of 100 guests and a 4-day celebration package. The dress she'd chosen cost $8,000, not including alterations, accessories, and the second reception dress she insisted was necessary for evening festivities. The photographer alone was demanding $15,000 for the destination package, plus travel expenses and accommodation. "This is my dream wedding," Isabella explained, during a family meeting where she presented her vision with PowerPoint slides and detailed budget breakdowns. "David and I want something that reflects our artistic sensibilities and creates memories that will last forever. Money shouldn't be a barrier to celebrating love." My parents nodded enthusiastically, clearly proud of their daughter's sophisticated taste and elaborate plans. They'd already committed to paying for the wedding without fully understanding the financial implications of Isabella's dream vision. "We can make this work," my father announced confidently. "The business is doing better now, and we have some financial flexibility we didn't have a few years ago. Isabella deserves to have the wedding she's always imagined." I listened to this conversation with growing horror, realizing that the financial flexibility he referenced was entirely dependent on my secret subsidies. Without my contributions covering their basic expenses, they wouldn't have had any discretionary income to fund even a modest wedding, let alone the extravaganza Isabella was demanding. But the real shock came when Isabella turned to me with her next announcement: "Maya, as my maid of honor, we're expecting you to contribute to some of the wedding expenses too. David's groomsmen are all artists and students, so they can't afford much, but you have a good job and no major expenses. We thought you could cover the bridesmaids' dresses, the bachelorette party, and maybe help with the honeymoon." The casual assumption that I would fund significant portions of her wedding, on top of the secret financial support I was already providing to our parents, was breathtaking in its audacity. She wasn't asking for my help, she was informing me of my financial obligations to her celebration. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. Isabella consulted her planning notebook with the efficiency of a project manager. "The bridesmaids' dresses are $400 each, and there are 6 of us, so that's $2,400. The bachelorette weekend in Miami should be around $5,000 for the group, flights, hotel, restaurants, activities. And we thought $10,000 would be a nice contribution toward the honeymoon since you're my only sibling." She was casually assigning me $17,400 in wedding-related expenses, while simultaneously expecting our parents to fund a $150,000 ceremony. The total financial burden on our family would exceed $165,000 for a single weekend celebration. "Isabella," I said carefully, "that's a lot of money. Maybe we should discuss more affordable alternatives that would still be beautiful and meaningful." The room fell silent. My parents looked uncomfortable, clearly torn between their desire to support Isabella's dreams and their growing awareness that the numbers were becoming overwhelming. But Isabella's reaction was immediate and explosive. "Maya, this is my wedding," she said, her voice rising with indignation. "I've been planning this for years, dreaming about this since I was little. You make good money, you live in a small apartment, you don't have a boyfriend or major expenses. What else are you spending your salary on?" The accusation hung in the air, that I was being selfish by not automatically funding her celebrations with money I'd earned through my own hard work. In Isabella's worldview, my financial success existed primarily to support her lifestyle and dreams. "I have expenses too," I explained. "Student loans, retirement savings, emergency funds. I can't just allocate $17,000 to wedding celebrations without serious financial planning." "But you're my sister," she protested, her voice taking on the whining tone that had always gotten her whatever she wanted from our parents. This is the most important day of my life. Families support each other during major life events. That's when my father stepped in with a suggestion that revealed how little he understood about my actual financial situation. Maya, maybe you could take out a loan or use credit cards to help with the wedding expenses. The business should be profitable enough next year to help you pay them off. The suggestion that I should go into debt to fund Isabella's extravagant wedding, while I was already secretly covering thousands of dollars in their monthly expenses, was the moment I realized how completely my family had lost perspective on financial reality and personal responsibility. But the conversation took an even more disturbing turn when my mother added her perspective. Maya, honey, you've always been practical and responsible. Isabella is more artistic, more emotional. She needs this wedding to feel loved and supported. You're strong enough to handle financial stress, but Isabella would be devastated if she couldn't have the celebration she's dreamed about. The message was clear. My emotional needs were less important than Isabella's desires, my financial stability was less valuable than her happiness, and my practical nature meant I should sacrifice for her artistic sensibilities. I need time to think about this, I said, standing up to leave the family meeting. Think about what? Isabella demanded. Maya, you're either going to support my wedding or you're not. It's not complicated. Are you going to be there for me during the most important moment of my life, or are you going to let money come between us? That question, whether I would let money come between us, was particularly ironic coming from someone who was demanding that I spend $17,400 to prove my love for her. As I drove home that evening, I realized I was facing a decision that went far beyond wedding expenses. I was being asked to fund a celebration that my family could only afford because of my secret financial contributions, while being treated like my own financial stability was irrelevant to their planning. More importantly, I was starting to understand that my role in this family would never change. I would always be the responsible one who sacrificed for Isabella's dreams, the practical daughter who enabled everyone else's financial irresponsibility, the supporting character in a drama that starred my sister. It was time to decide whether I was willing to play that role for the rest of my life. 2 weeks after Isabella's wedding demands, I made a decision that would change our family dynamic forever. I was going to stop my secret financial support and see how long their newfound stability would last without my invisible contributions. The plan was simple but devastating. I would gradually reduce my monthly payments to their bills, starting with non-essential expenses, and working toward critical services. Within 60 days, they would be facing the same financial crisis they'd experienced 2 years earlier, but this time without the emergency resources they'd already depleted. First, I stopped paying their cable and internet bills. Within a week, services were disconnected for non-payment. Then I stopped covering their car insurance premiums. Their policies lapsed, requiring immediate payment to avoid legal violations of their lease agreements. The grocery subsidies ended next. For 18 months, I'd been covering 60 to 70% of their weekly food expenses through strategic payments to their preferred stores. Suddenly, their grocery budget had to come entirely from their own resources. But the real test came when I stopped paying their credit card minimums. For over a year, I'd been making strategic payments that kept their balances from triggering late fees or interest rate increases. Without those payments, their monthly obligations jumped by nearly $1,200 due to penalty rates and accumulated fees. I watched the financial pressure build through subtle changes in family behavior. Dinner invitations became less frequent. My parents looked increasingly stressed during phone conversations. Isabella's wedding planning updates became more frantic as budget realities started impacting her elaborate plans. The breaking point came during a family dinner 3 weeks into my financial withdrawal experiment. Isabella was complaining about having to compromise on her wedding photography because the original photographer was too expensive, when my mother made an announcement that revealed how desperate their situation had become. "Girls, your father and I need to discuss some financial adjustments," she began, her voice carefully controlled. "The business has had some unexpected challenges, and we are going to need to cut back on some expenses." Isabella's face went white. "What kind of expenses? Are you talking about the wedding?" "Not the wedding," my father assured her quickly. "We are committed to giving you the celebration you deserve. But we might need to ask for some help with other things. Maya, your mother and I were wondering if you might be able to contribute to some household expenses for a few months while we get through this rough patch." The request was exactly what I'd been expecting. They wanted me to openly provide the financial support I'd been secretly giving them for 2 years, but without acknowledging that their current crisis was the same problem I'd been solving all along. "What kind of household expenses?" I asked. "Maybe $2,000 a month," my mother said quietly. "Just utilities, groceries, insurance payments. Nothing major, just until the business income stabilizes." Isabella immediately jumped in with her perspective. "Maya, you have to help them. The wedding is in 4 months, and Mom and Dad have already made commitments. If you don't contribute to the house expenses, they won't be able to afford my celebration." The audacity was breathtaking. She was asking me to subsidize our parents' living expenses so they could continue funding her $150,000 wedding, while also expecting me to contribute $17,400 toward bridesmaids' expenses and her honeymoon. "Isabella," I said carefully, "if Mom and Dad are having financial difficulties, maybe we should consider adjusting the wedding budget to something more affordable." Her reaction was immediate and nuclear. "Absolutely not. Maya, this is my wedding. I've been planning this for 2 years. The deposits are already paid, the invitations are ordered, the venue is booked. You can't just destroy my wedding because you don't want to help the family." "I'm not trying to destroy your wedding," I explained. "I'm suggesting that we find ways to celebrate your marriage that don't require everyone else to go into debt." That's when Isabella lost all pretense of reasonableness. "Maya, you are so selfish. You make twice what anyone else in this family makes, you have no expenses, no responsibilities, no life. All you do is work and save money. What is the point of having money if you won't help your family when we need it?" My parents were looking increasingly uncomfortable, but they didn't intervene as Isabella continued her attack. "You know what your problem is," she continued, her voice rising to a shriek. "You're jealous. You're jealous that I found love, that I'm getting married, that people care about me. You want to ruin my wedding because you can't stand seeing me happy." The accusation of jealousy was particularly cruel, because it dismissed my legitimate financial concerns while attacking my character and my single status. But Isabella wasn't finished. "You've always been jealous of me," she screamed, tears streaming down her face. "You can't stand that Mom and Dad love me more, that I'm prettier, that I have friends and a social life. You want to destroy my happiness because your own life is so pathetic." The room fell completely silent. Isabella's words hung in the air like poison, revealing exactly what she thought about her older sister, and why she felt entitled to my financial support. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to defend me, to tell Isabella that her accusations were unfair and hurtful. Instead, my father cleared his throat and said, "Maya, Isabella is under a lot of stress right now. Wedding planning is overwhelming, and she's just emotional. Maybe you could consider helping us through this difficult time." My mother nodded in agreement. "Isabella didn't mean those things, Maya. She's just scared that her wedding might be ruined. You know how important this is to her." They were asking me to ignore Isabella's vicious personal attacks and contribute thousands of dollars to enable a wedding celebration that was destroying their financial stability. They were choosing her emotions over my dignity, her dreams over my financial security. That's when I realized that nothing I could do or say would ever change this family dynamic. Isabella would always be the priority, and I would always be expected to sacrifice for her benefit while accepting whatever treatment she chose to dish out. "You're right," I said, standing up from the dinner table. "Isabella's wedding is incredibly important to her. And you're all right that I have the ability to solve these financial problems." For a moment, my parents looked relieved, assuming I was about to agree to their requests. "But I'm not going to do it," I continued. "Isabella, your wedding is your responsibility and David's responsibility. Mom and Dad, your household expenses are your responsibility. I'm not going to fund celebrations or subsidize lifestyles that you can't afford on your own." Isabella's face contorted with rage. "Maya, you are destroying this family. You are ruining my life. I will never forgive you for this. And that," I said, gathering my purse and keys, "is a risk I'm willing to take." As I walked toward the door, my mother called after me desperately, "Maya, please, can't we work something out? Families help each other." I turned back one final time. "Families do help each other, Mom. I've been helping this family for 2 years in ways you don't even know about. But families also respect each other, and love doesn't mean unlimited financial obligations." "What are you talking about?" my father asked. "Ask yourselves how your financial situation improved so dramatically over the past 2 years," I said. "Ask yourselves who's been paying the bills that kept your credit from being destroyed. Ask yourselves who made it possible for you to promise Isabella a wedding you couldn't afford." And then I left, knowing that within days they would discover exactly how much their responsible daughter had been contributing to their stability all along. The confrontation I'd been dreading for months was finally over, but the real drama was just beginning. For 3 days after I walked out of that disastrous family dinner, I ignored all attempts at contact. My phone buzzed constantly with increasingly frantic messages from my parents and Isabella, but I wasn't ready to engage with their drama until they understood the full scope of what I'd been doing for them. The revelation came exactly as I'd expected. On Thursday morning, my father called at 6:47 a.m., his voice shaking with panic. "Maya, something's wrong with our accounts. The utility company is saying we are 3 months behind on payments, but I know we've been current. The car insurance lapsed yesterday, and there's some kind of problem with our credit card payments. Can you help us figure out what's happening?" I let his voicemail play out completely before returning his call an hour later. "Dad," I said calmly, "there's nothing wrong with your accounts. What you're experiencing is your actual financial situation, without the subsidies I've been providing for the past 2 years." The silence on the other end lasted nearly 30 seconds. "What subsidies?" he finally whispered. "The utility payments, insurance premiums, grocery expenses, and credit card minimums that have been keeping you financially stable," I explained. "I've been covering approximately $2,800 per month in your household expenses since 2022. I could hear him trying to process this information, his breathing becoming more labored as the implications sank in. "Maya, that's impossible. We would have known if you were paying our bills." "You did know," I corrected. "You just assumed your financial problems had magically resolved themselves when your business started doing better. The business income helped, but it was never enough to cover the gap. I was covering the gap." Over the next hour, I walked him through the detailed records I'd kept of every payment, every strategic subsidy, every anonymous transfer that had kept their household functioning. The utilities that never got shut off, the insurance that never lapsed, the groceries that appeared on their tables, all of it had been funded by their older daughter while they focused on supporting Isabella's lifestyle and dreams. "Why didn't you tell us?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Because I wanted to help without creating obligation or resentment," I explained. "But also because I knew that if you understood how much I was contributing, you'd feel guilty about prioritizing Isabella's wants over your basic financial stability. That afternoon, my mother called, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. "Maya, baby, I don't understand. If you were helping us this whole time, why did you let Isabella say those terrible things to you? Why didn't you defend yourself?" "Because defending myself would have required revealing information that would have humiliated you and destroyed Isabella's illusions about your financial capacity," I said. "I was protecting the family dynamic even while she was attacking me for being selfish." The cruel irony wasn't lost on any of us. While Isabella had screamed about my selfishness and lack of family loyalty, I had been quietly sacrificing nearly $70,000 of my own earnings to keep their household stable and make her wedding dreams financially possible. But the most devastating revelation was still to come. When my parents sat down to calculate their actual budget without my subsidies, they discovered that Isabella's wedding, which they'd confidently promised to fund, was completely impossible given their real financial situation. The $150,000 celebration Isabella had been planning would require them to liquidate their retirement savings, mortgage their home beyond its value, and take on credit card debt that would take decades to repay. Without my secret contributions, they were facing the same financial crisis that had been building for years, just with less time and fewer options for recovery. Isabella's call came Friday evening, and her tone was completely different from the screaming accusations she'd hurled at me during our last family dinner. "Maya," she said, her voice small and uncertain, "Mom told me about the money you've been giving them. I had no idea. I'm sorry for what I said about you being selfish." "Are you sorry for what you said, or are you sorry because you found out it wasn't true?" I asked. Another long silence. "Both," she finally admitted. "Maya, I said horrible things to you, and you were helping our family the whole time. I feel terrible." "Isabella, the money was never the real issue," I explained. "The issue was being treated like my financial contributions were obligations rather than gifts, and being attacked personally when I tried to set reasonable boundaries." "But you're still going to help with the wedding, right?" she asked, her voice becoming more anxious. "I mean, now that everyone knows how much you've been doing, we can work out a fair arrangement where you get credit for your contributions." And there it was. Even after discovering the extent of my secret support, after learning that her accusations of selfishness had been completely wrong, Isabella's primary concern was still ensuring that her wedding plans could proceed as scheduled. "Isabella, I'm not going to fund your wedding," I said clearly. "Not the bridesmaids' dresses, not the bachelorette party, not the honeymoon contribution, and not the household subsidies that would make it possible for Mom and Dad to afford their portion." Her voice immediately shifted back to panic. "But Maya, everything's already planned. The deposits are paid, the venue is booked, the invitations are sent. You can't just let my wedding be ruined." "I'm not ruining your wedding," I corrected. "I'm declining to pay for a wedding that was planned without any consideration for what your family could actually afford." "What am I supposed to do?" she wailed. "Cancel everything? Disappoint everyone? Tell David that we can't get married because my family won't help us?" "Isabella, you have several options," I explained patiently. "You can plan a wedding that fits within your actual budget. You can postpone until you and David have saved money to contribute. You can ask David's family to help financially. You can downsize the celebration to something meaningful but affordable." "Those aren't real options," she protested. "Maya, please, I'm begging you. I'll pay you back. I'll apologize publicly for what I said. I'll do anything, but please don't let my wedding be destroyed." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Isabella cycling between apologies, promises, threats, and emotional manipulation. But the fundamental issue remained unchanged. She believed that her desires justified unlimited financial support from family members, regardless of the impact on their own financial security. That weekend, my parents drove to my apartment for a face-to-face conversation that would determine whether our family relationships could be salvaged or whether the damage from years of financial prioritization and emotional favoritism was irreversible. The conversation we were about to have would force all of us to confront truths we'd been avoiding for decades. My parents arrived at my apartment on Saturday morning looking like they'd aged 10 years in the past week. The stress of confronting their true financial situation, combined with the guilt of discovering how much I'd been secretly contributing to their stability, had clearly taken a devastating toll on both of them. Maya, my mother began before they'd even sat down, we need to talk about everything. Not just the money, but the way we've treated you, the way we've let Isabella treat you, and how we can fix what's been broken in this family. My father nodded, his usual confidence completely gone. We had no idea you'd been supporting us financially. But more than that, we had no idea how much we'd been taking your contributions, financial and emotional, for granted while prioritizing Isabella's wants over everyone else's needs. They settled onto my couch, and for the first time in years, I had their complete attention without Isabella's drama dominating the conversation. The money was never really the issue, I began. I was happy to help when you were struggling. What hurt was being treated like my willingness to help was an obligation, and being attacked personally when I tried to set reasonable boundaries. Isabella was wrong to say those things to you, my mother said firmly. We should have stopped her immediately. We should have defended you. But you didn't, I pointed out. Even after she screamed that I was jealous, selfish, and pathetic, your response was to ask me to ignore her behavior and continue funding the lifestyle that made her outburst possible. My father winced at the reminder. We were so focused on keeping Isabella happy that we forgot our responsibility to treat both our daughters fairly. We told ourselves that you were strong enough to handle her behavior, but that was just an excuse for enabling her worst impulses. What followed was the most honest conversation we'd had in years. My parents acknowledged that they'd created a family dynamic where Isabella's emotional needs always took priority, where my financial success was seen as a family resource rather than a personal achievement, and where my practical nature was used as justification for expecting me to sacrifice for everyone else's comfort. We were so proud of Isabella's beauty and charm, my mother admitted, tears streaming down her face. We thought she'd bring prestige to our family, elevate our social status. We forgot that character and loyalty matter more than appearance and popularity. And we took advantage of your responsible nature, my father added. We knew you'd work hard, succeed professionally, and help family when needed. But we treated those qualities like they were automatic rather than gifts you chose to share with us. The conversation revealed years of accumulated resentments and misunderstandings. My parents had genuinely believed they were preparing me for a successful, independent life, while giving Isabella the support she needed to find her path. They hadn't realized they were creating a dynamic where my achievements were minimized while Isabella's demands were prioritized. We thought you didn't need as much attention because you were so capable, my father explained. Every challenge you faced, you solved. Every goal you set, you achieved. Isabella seemed more fragile, more in need of guidance and support. But what we didn't see, my mother continued, was that our capable daughter was carrying everyone else's problems while her own emotional needs went unrecognized. The revelation that hit them hardest was understanding how Isabella's wedding demands had exposed the full extent of their financial dysfunction. The elaborate celebration she'd planned wasn't just expensive. It was a symbol of everything wrong with their family's relationship with money and priorities. We can't afford Isabella's wedding, my father said quietly. Without your subsidies, we can barely afford our basic expenses. The venue deposits alone represent 2 months of our actual discretionary income. What are you going to do? I asked. My mother looked at my father, then back at me. We are going to tell Isabella the truth. The whole truth. About our real financial situation, about your secret contributions, and about how her wedding plans need to be completely reconsidered. She's not going to take that well, I warned. Probably not, my father agreed. But we should have had this conversation years ago, instead of letting our financial problems escalate while enabling her increasingly unrealistic expectations. The hardest part of our discussion was addressing the future of our family relationships. My parents wanted to repair the damage that had been done, but they also needed to understand that trust, once broken, requires time and consistent action to rebuild. Maya, my mother said, we know we can't undo the hurt we've caused or take back the things Isabella said to you. But we want to try to build something healthier going forward, if you're willing. What would that look like? I asked. Honest communication about finances, my father said immediately. No more secrets, no more assumptions about who will contribute what to family expenses. If we need help, we ask directly and accept whatever answer you give us without pressure or guilt. Equal treatment between you and Isabella, my mother added. Your achievements deserve the same celebration as hers. Your needs deserve the same consideration as hers. Your boundaries deserve the same respect as hers. And accountability, my father continued. Isabella needs to apologize genuinely for her behavior and demonstrate through actions that she understands how hurtfully she treated you. I spent the rest of that afternoon outlining conditions for rebuilding our family relationships. The financial boundaries were non-negotiable. I would no longer provide secret subsidies. All requests for assistance would be discussed openly, and any help I chose to provide would be acknowledged as a gift rather than treated as an obligation. More importantly, the emotional dynamics had to change. Isabella would need to take responsibility for her behavior and demonstrate genuine respect for my contributions to the family. My parents would need to show through consistent actions that both daughters were equally valued and that my practical nature wasn't an excuse for taking advantage of my generosity. There's one more thing, I said as our conversation was winding down. Isabella's wedding planning has revealed some fundamental problems with how this family makes financial decisions. Even if we resolve our relationship issues, I need to know that you understand the difference between wants and needs, and that you won't mortgage your financial security for social appearances. My parents exchanged a look that suggested they were finally grasping the full scope of changes that would be required. That evening, they called Isabella and David to arrange a family meeting where everyone would learn about the real state of family finances and the true cost of the wedding they'd been planning. The conversation they were about to have would force Isabella to confront realities she'd been avoiding for years and make decisions about what really mattered to her. The family meeting was scheduled for the following Sunday, exactly 1 week after Isabella's explosive tantrum had driven me away from the dinner table. But this time, the conversation would be based on honesty rather than assumptions, and everyone would have to take responsibility for their choices and their behavior. The little sister, who'd spent years believing she was entitled to unlimited family financial support, was about to learn some very expensive lessons about budgets, priorities, and the difference between love and enablement. Sunday's family meeting took place at my parents' house, but the atmosphere was completely different from the explosive dinner that had driven me away the week before. Isabella and David arrived looking anxious and confused, clearly unsure why they'd been summoned for an important family discussion about wedding finances and family relationships. My parents had prepared meticulously for this conversation, gathering financial documents, budget spreadsheets, and a detailed breakdown of their actual monthly income versus expenses. For the first time in years, they were going to present their real financial situation without the illusions that my secret subsidies had made possible. Before we discuss the wedding, my father began, there are some things about our family's financial situation that everyone needs to understand. Over the next hour, my parents systematically dismantled every assumption Isabella had been operating under. The family business, while stable, generated far less profit than she'd believed. Their monthly expenses consistently exceeded their income. The credit card debt that had accumulated over years of overspending now required minimum payments that consumed nearly a quarter of their earnings. Most shocking to Isabella was learning about my 2-year pattern of secret financial support. As my parents explained each category of expenses I'd been covering, utilities, insurance, groceries, emergency repairs, her face went through a series of expressions that ranged from disbelief to embarrassment to growing horror. Maya was paying our electric bill, she whispered. Our car insurance. Our grocery expenses. Approximately $2,800 per month, my mother confirmed. For 24 months. That's nearly $70,000 that your sister contributed to our household stability, while we focused on supporting your post-graduation expenses and wedding plans. David, who'd been silent through most of these revelations, finally spoke up. Isabella, did you know about any of this? Of course I didn't know, she snapped, but her defensive tone suggested she was starting to understand the implications of her ignorance. The real moment of truth came when my parents presented the mathematical reality of Isabella's wedding plans. The $150,000 celebration she'd designed would require them to liquidate their retirement accounts, take a second mortgage on their home, and accumulate credit card debt that would take over a decade to repay, assuming they never encountered any other financial emergencies. Even with Maya's past contributions, my father explained, we can't afford the wedding you've planned. Without her contributions, we are facing the same financial crisis we experienced 2 years ago. Isabella's response was immediate and predictable, so Maya just has to start helping again. She was doing it before, she can continue doing it. Problem solved. The entitlement in her voice, the assumption that my financial support was something she could demand rather than appreciate, demonstrated that she still didn't understand the fundamental problem with our family dynamic. Isabella, I said quietly, I'm not going to continue subsidizing household expenses so that Mom and Dad can fund your wedding. And I'm not going to contribute $17,400 toward bridesmaids' expenses and your honeymoon. But you make good money, she protested, falling back on her old arguments. You don't have major expenses. What else are you going to spend it on? My retirement, my emergency fund, my future home purchase, my student loans, I listed systematically. My financial security is not a family resource for funding celebrations we can't afford. That's when David surprised everyone by asking the question that cut to the heart of the issue. Isabella, why do we need a $150,000 wedding? What's wrong with something smaller that we could actually afford ourselves? Isabella's reaction was swift and vicious. David, don't you dare side with them against me. This is our wedding, our special day. If you don't want to fight for the celebration we deserve, maybe you're not ready to be married. The threat was clear, agree with her demands or face the end of their engagement. But David's response revealed that he'd been thinking about these issues longer than any of us had realized. Isabella, I love you, but I don't love what this wedding planning has done to you. You've become someone who screams at her sister for not funding your dreams, who demands that your parents risk their financial security for one day of celebration, and who threatens to end our engagement if I question spending more money than most people make in 3 years. The room fell completely silent. David was calling out behavior that our family had been enabling for years, and Isabella was forced to confront how her demands appeared to someone who wasn't invested in maintaining her illusions. Are you saying you don't want to marry me? She asked, her voice breaking. I'm saying I want to marry the woman I fell in love with, not the person who thinks love is measured by how much money people will spend on her happiness, David replied. What happened next was the most important moment in our family's recent history. Isabella had a choice. She could continue demanding that everyone else sacrifice for her desires, or she could accept responsibility for her behavior and work toward rebuilding the relationships she'd damaged. After several minutes of tense silence, Isabella began to cry, not the manipulative tears she'd used during arguments, but genuine sobs of someone finally understanding the impact of her actions. "Maya," she said through her tears, "I'm sorry. I'm really, truly sorry. Not just because I found out about the money you were giving Mom and Dad, but because I said horrible, cruel things to you that weren't true. You're not jealous or selfish or pathetic. You've been more generous to this family than any of us deserved, and I attacked you for not being even more generous." The apology was more comprehensive than anything I'd expected from Isabella, but apologies alone weren't enough to repair years of damaged relationships. "Isabella, I appreciate your apology, but I need to see changes in behavior, not just words," I explained. "This family has patterns that go far beyond wedding planning or financial support." Over the following hours, we established new ground rules for family interactions. Financial requests would be discussed openly, with honest information about everyone's actual circumstances. Isabella would plan and pay for her own wedding, with whatever assistance David's family chose to provide, and whatever modest contribution our parents could afford without going into debt. Most importantly, Isabella would attend financial counseling to understand the difference between wants and needs, and family counseling with David to address the relationship dynamics that had nearly destroyed their engagement. 6 months later, Isabella and David had a beautiful, modest ceremony in our parents' backyard with 50 guests, and a budget under $15,000. Isabella looked radiant in a $400 dress, and the celebration was filled with genuine joy rather than financial stress. She discovered that a meaningful wedding didn't require expensive venues or elaborate productions. My relationship with my parents slowly rebuilt based on mutual respect and honest communication. They've never again asked me for financial assistance, but they have consistently shown appreciation for my past contributions and included me as an equal participant in family decisions. Most surprisingly, Isabella and I developed a closer relationship than we'd ever had before. Freed from the competition for parental resources and attention, she began to appreciate my practical qualities, while I learned to value her creativity and emotional intelligence. The family dynamic that had been built on financial enablement and emotional favoritism was replaced by something healthier, relationships based on mutual respect, honest communication, and the understanding that love doesn't require unlimited sacrifice. Have you ever been the responsible sibling who was expected to sacrifice for your family while watching a golden child get endless support? Sometimes walking away is the only way to force people to see how much you've been contributing to their happiness while your own needs went ignored. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have continued secretly supporting your family while being attacked for not doing enough? Or would you have exposed the truth like I did? I'm curious about your thoughts on family loyalty versus self-preservation, especially when one sibling is clearly favored over others. The hardest part of this experience wasn't the money, it was accepting that my family had been taking my contributions for granted while prioritizing my sister's wants over my well-being. But ultimately, forcing them to face the financial and emotional reality of their behavior saved our relationships by removing the dynamics that had been poisoning our interactions for years. If this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and share your own experiences with sibling favoritism or family financial drama in the comments. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and protecting your own interests? Your stories help others who might be facing similar situations with demanding family members. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about family betrayals, sibling rivalry, and the complex dynamics that happen when one family member is consistently expected to sacrifice for everyone else's benefit. Ring that notification bell so you never miss the latest updates about family drama, boundary setting, and learning to value yourself even when others don't. Please share this video with anyone who needs to hear that it's okay to set boundaries with family members, even when they claim you're being selfish for protecting your own financial and emotional well-being. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is force people to face the consequences of their behavior. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, being the responsible one doesn't mean accepting unlimited demands from family members who take your generosity for granted. You deserve relationships based on mutual respect, not one-sided sacrifice. Until next time, keep setting healthy boundaries, keep protecting your financial independence, and keep believing that real family loyalty goes both ways. The people who truly love you will respect your limits rather than punish you for having them.